Okay, thank you. So this is about type-safe blazon enforcing pedantry in heraldic design. So I'm going to start with a bit of kind of imagination. Imagine that it's the Middle Ages and you want to be one of these guys. You want to be a jouster. What are the things you need? Well, if that picture is anything to go by, there are three components. You need a horse, you need a lance, and you need a cool costume. Now, the horse is easy to get, right? All horses are basically the same. You go to the horse store, you buy a horse. Same thing for the lance. It's a pointed stick. They pretty much grow on trees. The costume, though, that's a little bit more complicated, right? Because you want a kind of personal design. You don't want to look like everyone else. And so you're going to design this yourself. And so the way you're going to do this is that you're going to take a shield and then design a cool shield and then base your costume on that. And the shield is going to be called a coat of arms. And you're probably familiar with this by England's coat of arms or University of Singapore's coat of arms. But you go and you start designing this coat of arms. And so you start with maybe a red background because you like red, and maybe your name is Valerie, so you add a chevron to hide a V in your shield, and you add 3 green lions to it because green is your favorite color, the same as red, I don't know. And so you're happy with that. And okay, there's a bit of bureaucracy you have to go through because there's some kind of official register, and this guy writes down this weird text about Latin or something. And but after that, you're happy. You've become a jouster, and you lose the joust because you thought the most important thing was the costume, but you have a good time. Now, 800 years later, you're scrolling through Reddit, and your coat of arms comes up, and you're psyched about that, right? Because you're Reddit famous. But then you start reading the comments, and the comments are not nice, right? They're saying things like ugly, they're saying things like rot, they're saying things in French, and you have your head in your hands, and you can't help thinking, what went wrong, and what could we have done to prevent this? Now, what went wrong is that you got yourself involved in heraldry, which is the study and art of coats of arms. And it turns out that there are rules to heraldry. One of the first rules one learns is blah, 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 blah. And this rule you broke. You broke the first rule of heraldry. What could we have done to prevent this? Well, that's the topic of today's talk. Specifically, I want to talk about Blazon. Blazon is the language used to specify coats of arms. I'm going to introduce some rules to Blazon, and then I will talk about the theory of a type-safe version of Blazon, which will prevent breaking these rules. So first, again, Blazon is the language used to describe coats of arms. The weird text that we saw before was a blazon. So gules a chevron azure between 3 lions rampant vert describes a coat of arms. And specifically, it's building it up from the foundation, from the background to the foreground. So gules is a word meaning red. It's a red background. Then we have a blue chevron on that. That's, of course, the blue chevron. And then 3 lions rampant vert. That's 3 green lions. Now, the foreign words in that phrase were describing tinctures. And tincture is the word in heraldry to describe a standard color or pattern. And we just divide these among 3 different types. We have colors, metals, and furs. The colors are the dark colors. Azure, gules, purpure, sable, and vert describe blue, red, purple, black, green. Then we have the metals. These are the white and yellow, or silver and gold, each with their own word. And then we have the furs. And these are ver and ermine, which are the red squirrel and the stoat, respectively. And the distinction between these 3 groups ends up being very important to the rules of heraldry. So now that we have the tinctures, we can actually make our first blazon, because the simplest blazon consists only of what's called the field, the background. And so ermine, just this one-word blazon, describes this relatively complex design, which is the arms of Brittany. But we don't usually just want to do a background. usually we want to make it a little bit more complicated. And so upon the field, we might put what's called an ordinary, which is a simple geometric charge which always has the same location. So you can see on the right, there's a list of a whole bunch of different ordinaries, but the way that we would use them is that we would start with a background, azure, meaning blue, a bend argent, a diagonal stripe white or silver. We can also introduce divisions. We don't always want the field just to be one basic thing. Instead, we want to divide the field into different parts. And so these will often be per some ordinary. So per bend, per chevron, per fess, per pale, per saltier. That's dividing along the line of an ordinary. Here we have quarterly, or an azure, a bend gules, meaning divided into quarters, yellow and blue, a diagonal stripe red. The final thing I want to introduce is the mobile charge. And this is something that's a charge of arbitrary design, which is not restricted in its location. So it can really be anything. I have several examples here, a boar, an estoile, a griffin, and so on. But it can also be, a rock or a computer or whatever you want it to be. This is where things can be kind of anything arbitrarily. And so again, I have a blazon here, sable, a bend between 3 estoiles or, sable, a black background, a bend, diagonal stripe, we know. 3 estoiles are these 3 small stars. Now, we don't just want to have simple charges, but we also want to describe the charges. And we use that. We do that with what's called an attitude. For example, this lion can have several different attitudes. It can be rampant, it can be passant, sejeant, and all of these other ones to describe in what position it is. So with all of that, we can finally put together a more complex example. Similar to what we had before, quarterly or an azure, which is to say, divided into quarters, yellow and blue. On a bend gules, 3 lions passant or. On the diagonal stripe red, 3 lions walking forward, yellow. So I'll give you 10 seconds to review the vocabulary that we've learned so far, and I'll take a drink of water. Okay. So those are the basics. Now I'm going to introduce you to the rules. Now, when I say rules, what I mean are guidelines, right? This is an art, and so you can't really apply rules to art. I mean, you can, but they're guidelines and conventions, and specifically, they are the guidelines and conventions proposed by some people in the 1850s and 1920s. So we're limited here in both time and space. And moreover, this is all kind of via my interpretation. They did not give formal specifications. They gave, English words mostly. And so there's a little bit of gray area in a lot of this. But with that said, the first rule, the rules are divided into 3 categories, or I've divided them into 3. The first is style, which is to say, is the blazon itself elegant? Does it sound nice when you say it? Then there's validity. Does it make sense at all? And then there's tincture. Is the result pretty in some sense? So the first style rule is that no charge can be given an inappropriate attitude. So vert, a lion, rampant, argent, that's fine, right? We saw rampant, that means rearing up. But rampant is only a thing that predators can be. Here we have a stag, and stag is prey. And so when we have, something's not coming up. Oh, there we go. So when we have stag, a stag cannot be rampant. Instead, it needs to be springing, or what we call salient. And in the same way, a lion cannot be salient. It needs to be rearing up. So there are certain words that you have to use depending on what charge you have. The next rule is that no tincture can be named twice. So this blazon that I presented earlier breaks the rules because we said or twice, and that's not allowed. That's considered inelegant. And so instead what we do is we use an index to index back into our list of tinctures and say, we named or first thing, and so we're going to say of the first to describe that first tincture we named. And of course, you can do of the second and of the third and so on. So those are the style rules. Then there are validity rules. This, again, recall that rampant means rearing up. And so the idea of a plow rearing up is, well, if you're creative enough, you can think of it, but generally we don't describe plows as rearing up. And so things like this, or even worse, saying an apple is rearing up or whatever, it's just nonsensical. And so you can't have an invalid attitude in that sense. Another rule is that we want to avoid index out of bounds errors. So if we have a blazon like this, where we say per pale argent and sable on a fess or a lozenge of the fourth, we named 3 tinctures, but we said of the fourth, this doesn't make any sense. And so we need to disqualify this blazon as well. Now, the most important rule of heraldry, or at least the earliest one learns, is the so-called rule of tincture. And the basic idea is that you can't have a color on a color, and you can't have a metal on a metal. And so if you have something like this, where we have a field gules and a bend azure, this breaks the rule, because we have a color on a color. On the other hand, if you have something like this, which is arguably uglier, it's actually okay. Fur on fur is allowed, and it's explicitly allowed by some authors. This, again, illegal, because this is a metal on a metal. But if you have a color on both a metal and a color, that's actually also allowed. So it's a very simple rule, but there's a lot of little nuance to it. So here are, again, a quick review of the rules of Blazon. And now that we have these rules, we can formalize. So here is a grammar of what I've called Miniblazon, a very small subset of the entire world of Blazon. I'm not going to get into the details of what all of this is. Instead, I will just say that with this kind of formal language, we can get to a type system. And specifically, the type system needs to do 4 things. It needs to check the attitudes of all the charges. It needs to check that the tinctures are named only once. And it needs to check the references to tinctures. And finally, it needs to check the rule of tincture that we described before. So the type system, again, I won't get into too much detail, but it looks like this. Instead, I will give a short demo, or I'll pretend to give a demo from screenshotted pictures of my terminal. So we have an implementation that is kind of a read evaluate print loop, and we can put in a blazon like this, which says align rampant argent. You'll recall that this one is okay. Lions can indeed be rampant, and so we get okay. If we say a stag rampant, that you recall is illegal, and so we get invalid attitude. This one, quarterly or and azure, blah, 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 or we name or twice, so we get another error, repeated tincture. This one, again, index out of bounds error, so we get a nice undefined tincture reference. And this one, your design from many years ago, this one, you get a rule of tincture violation. So you deserved all the hate you got online. This is inappropriate. Now, with the implementation, we can perform an evaluation. So there's a corpus of about 50,000 blazons written in 1874, or long before that, but published in 1874, called Papworth's Ordinary. Actually, it has this very long name here, but people call it Papworth's Ordinary. And so we went through this and selected, well, not selected, randomly transcribed about 2,000 of them. And of these 2,000, we can parse with the implementation about half. And of that half, 972 of them type check according to our type rules. Of those, we had 9 violations of the no repeated tincture rule, and we had 24 rule of tincture violations. Then there were 20 other errors, which were rules that I wasn't able to talk about in this talk, but we can talk about afterwards if you're interested. And that's all. So in summary, today I presented to you Blazon, the rules of Blazon, and a type-safe version of Blazon with a theory, implementation, and evaluation. In the paper, there's a lot more. There's an extended introduction to Blazon, a complete set of rules, the full grammar that I kind of skipped over, as well as a discussion of methodology and a lot more examples. And that's all. Thank you.
Question, and we are going to run over to the session.
I commented the question.
Yeah.
My comment is, that is so cool.
Oh, thank you.
I encourage you to write that up very thoroughly and make it available, because I can imagine many first-year teachers would want to take advantage of this as an example or exercise for their class. I think it will do really well for them. The question I want to ask is, from these descriptions, you generated pictures. Sometimes it's clear that the picture is uniquely defined, but if you have one of these, I can't remember the name, things that can be freely placed.
Right.
So is the picture uniquely generated? Is that specified by the rules, or are there additional variations? And then how do you deal with that?
Okay, so there are two things. First of all, I did not generate any images. All I have is a type checker, and the images there were actually generated via a program called DrawShield, which does does everything except the type checking. It's a non-type safe generator. For the other part of the question, so yes, there's a lot that's unspecified. For example, if I say there are 17 stars on a shield, in principle, those could go anywhere. And so some of the future work I'd be very interested in is describing some restrictions on what those, or kind of preferences on what those should be. For example, if you have n stars, usually the way you want to display them on a shield preferentially is in a triangle shape. That's just the way convention is. And of course, that's not in these type rules at all, but that kind of restriction would be very interesting to implement. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I agree.
Thanks.
Have you tried anything like composing them, like maybe parameterizing them over something and then composing them together? See how that works out.
Can you explain a little bit?
You've got just the, what was it called, the band and then the stars, and then like make a function that takes the background as a parameter, and then try to make a family of
yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. It wouldn't be Blazon in that sense. It would be some kind of super Blazon language. Yeah, meta Blazon maybe. Yes, yes. Yeah.
Thank you for the awesome talk.
Thank you.
I'm curious, have you looked at when you print your error messages saying, here's a repeated color, use the urgent twice here, whatever. Have you thought about referencing why that thing is wrong? Either, you have a color on a color, and here's the color that you've placed over. Or invalid reference, here are your three things that you named the fourth.
Yeah, that's definitely possible, and it wouldn't be too hard to add. I'm just kind of lazy.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Last question, and move on to the next topic. For the violations of the rules, when you were looking at those examples, did you find yourself agreeing? By which I mean, have you steeped in heraldry as you are, looked at them and gone, yeah, that is kind of ugly, where'd you know?
There were definitely some of them, especially the violation of the rule of tincture. It does make sense. You don't want, I don't know, like blue on red is a classic GUI or graphic design faux pas to have blue and red together. And so I do think they do protect you from making some mistakes, but I also think that they're a little bit overboard. I also agree that it sounds better or fancier if you say of the first instead of or twice. But it's just doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Well, let's thank the speaker.
Thank you.